In the weeks after 30 March 2002, William Tallon received a letter telling him to leave Gate Lodge, the accommodation attached to Clarence House where he had lived for decades. Tallon had entered royal service in 1951, joined the Queen Mother's household, and served as its steward and page of the Backstairs from 1978. The Queen Mother was dead, and the house no longer required the household that had revolved around her. That letter didn't end a friendship. It ended an arrangement. The Queen Mother's death exposed the boundary of palace loyalty. Service could become intensely personal, but employment still belonged to an institution capable of closing one household, retaining a few workers, and sending redundancy notices to the rest. Clarence House had been the Queen Mother's London home from 1953 until 2002. It was the Queen Mother's principal London residence from 1953 until her death in 2002, but its public appearance concealed a tightly organized workplace. A household of this kind needed more than people who appeared at ceremonial occasions. Someone prepared meals and drinks, cleaned rooms, laid tables, opened doors, carried trays, maintained clothes, cared for dogs, arranged transport, tended gardens, watched the property overnight, and made sure official engagements happened on time. The Queen Mother also maintained other residences, including Royal Lodge, Burke Hall, the Castle of May, and Walmer Castle, so the work extended beyond one London address. The division between upstairs and below stairs described a real structure. Above stairs were private secretaries, comptrollers, equerries, ladies-in-waiting, and pages of the presence, handling correspondence, engagements, access, and formal duties. Below stairs were stewards, butlers, footmen, pages, valets, housekeepers, dressers, maids, and kitchen staff. Chefs, chauffeurs, gardeners, and a watchman supported the wider operation. The names of the jobs changed the status of the work, but not its physical demands. A footman might serve meals, open and close doors, carry objects between rooms, and care for the Queen Mother's dogs. A chef managed the kitchen. A housekeeper maintained rooms that could be used privately 1 hour and for an official reception the next. A chauffeur linked the household to the outside world. Tallon coordinated the domestic side from the Backstairs, organizing entertaining and the daily mechanics that visitors rarely saw. The routine was repetitive by design. Later accounts describe drinks appearing at fixed points in the day: Dubonnet and gin before lunch, wine with lunch, a dry martini before dinner, and champagne with dinner. Whether every detail of that schedule remained unchanged is less important than the labor it implies. Someone stocked the Dubonnet, someone maintained the correct ratio, someone knew when the tray had to arrive and when the room had to be cleared. A palace household worked because dozens of small tasks were completed without becoming visible. The finished result was privacy, punctuality, and the impression that royal life moved by instinct. In reality, it moved by payroll. The staffing figures vary because different reports counted different groups. One 2002 report put the Queen Mother's Clarence House staff at about 50, within a wider retinue of approximately 83. Another account described nearly 30 core employees. A separate report referred to more than a dozen full-time employees at Clarence House alone. Those numbers may include different residences, temporary workers, ceremonial staff, domestic staff, and employees attached to the wider personal establishment. There is no complete public payroll separating every category on 30 March 2002. That uncertainty matters, because the central figure in this story is usually presented with more precision than the surviving evidence allows. The people themselves weren't interchangeable to the household. William Tallon was born in Birtley, County Durham, in 1935. At 15, he began working in royal service at Buckingham Palace in 1951. He later joined the Queen Mother at Clarence House and, in 1978, became Steward and Page of the Backstairs. His nickname, Backstairs Billy, turned him into a familiar figure in popular accounts of palace life. Behind the nickname was a long working day. Tallon was reportedly on duty from early morning until the Queen Mother went to bed. His duties included domestic management, party organization, entertaining arrangements, and the routine mechanics of the household. Reginald Wilcock, who became Tallon's partner, joined the Queen Mother's staff in 1960 after serving as a footman at Buckingham Palace. He later served the Queen Mother as Deputy Steward and Page of the Presence. On 4 August 2000, he served the Queen Mother her morning tea for her 100th birthday. Dame Frances Campbell Preston served as one of the Queen Mother's ladies-in-waiting from 1965 until 2002. Her position wasn't necessarily equivalent to that of a salaried below-stairs employee, but her tenure shows how long continuity could last inside the household. Some of the Queen Mother's employees had spent decades learning the exact preferences, timings, and silences of one person. They knew which rooms were private, which visitors were expected, which instructions could be given verbally, and which had to remain confidential. Royal staff operated under strict obligations not to disclose what they saw and heard. That secrecy protected the household's privacy, but it also left a thin public record of the workers' employment conditions. Much of what is known about the staff comes through biographies, obituaries, newspaper reports, and later recollections rather than a complete internal personnel archive. The result is a workplace that can be reconstructed from its routines, but not counted with absolute precision. On 30 March 2002, the Queen Mother died at Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park. She was 101. The official announcement said that she had died peacefully in her sleep this afternoon at Royal Lodge, Windsor. Operation Tay Bridge, the pre-planned funeral protocol, immediately set the ceremonial machinery in motion. Her coffin was initially placed in the Queen's Chapel at St. James's Palace and later moved to Westminster Hall, where she lay in state for 3 days. Her funeral took place at Westminster Abbey on 9 April. The bell of the Abbey sounded 101 times, one chime for each year of her life. While the country saw ceremony, the Queen Mother's personal household faced a different process. Her death removed the person whose daily needs had justified the household's existence. Clarence House still stood, but the Queen Mother's establishment no longer had a principal to serve. That distinction is essential. Clarence House didn't disappear. The building was refurbished through 2002 and 2003, with work including asbestos removal, rewiring, new fire detection, and redecoration. In 2003, it became the official London residence of the Prince of Wales. The house survived. The employer changed. Early April reporting in The Independent described dozens of the Queen Mother's staff as facing redundancy and the possible loss of accommodation. The article said some of the longest-serving employees might be retained by other members of the royal family, particularly if the Prince of Wales moved into Clarence House. A palace spokesperson later summarized the basic rule in a plain sentence. Their staff, in effect, become redundant. That is the administrative shock of a personal household. When the principal dies, the work attached to that principal can cease to exist even when the staff have performed it faithfully for years. The transition wasn't literally completed on the morning after the death. Funeral duties continued until 9 April. Estate arrangements followed. The Queen Mother's will was published on 16th May, and Queen Elizabeth II inherited the estate, with specific bequests to staff to be made by the Queen. Clarence House then entered a long refurbishment and reassignment process, but administrative timelines don't remove the abruptness of the change. A household built around continuity had lost its purpose in a single afternoon. The central numerical account comes from a later transcript that says, approximately 30 below-stairs Clarence House staff received redundancy notices in the weeks after 30th March 2002. It describes more than 40 household employees in the relevant count, with roughly 12 finding continued royal employment, primarily in the Prince of Wales's establishment. Those figures are widely useful because they show the scale of the unequal outcome. They aren't independently confirmed by an official payroll or a complete contemporaneous personnel list. The stronger contemporaneous wording is dozens. The exact numbers, 30 notices, more than 40 employees, and roughly 12 continuing royal jobs, should therefore be treated as reported estimates, not a census. That qualification does not erase the labor event. It defines it accurately. Dozens of workers faced redundancy. Some continued in royal employment. The Queen Mother's staff weren't all treated as one indivisible group, and they didn't all have the same destination. The smaller retained group was reportedly absorbed primarily into the Prince of Wales's establishment. The move into Clarence House created a practical reason to keep some workers who already knew the building, its systems, and the demands of a royal household. The Independent named Michael Seal, a chef, Leslie Chappell, a page, and William "Billy" Tallon as likely candidates for retention if the Prince of Wales took over the house. The public record does not provide a complete list of who transferred. It does not establish whether retained workers had the same salaries, duties, ranks, pensions, accommodation, or contractual terms. It does not show that every person named as likely to be retained ultimately received an equivalent job. Captain Sir Alistair Aird, the Queen Mother's private secretary and comptroller, was described as carrying the difficult responsibility of finding alternative employment for staff who wanted to continue working. That detail gives the transition a human shape, but it also reveals the limit of personal advocacy. A senior official might try to place workers elsewhere. He couldn't preserve the old household once its principal was gone. The decision was therefore unequal in two directions. Some workers had a route into another royal establishment, others didn't. The evidence suggests that long service improved the chances of retention in some cases, but no formal selection system has been identified. A chef might be useful to a new household. A page might have a comparable role. Someone familiar with Clarence House could carry knowledge into its next phase. Those are practical explanations supported by the roles named in contemporary reporting. They aren't proof that loyalty was converted into a guaranteed entitlement. The same institution that valued continuity also had to decide which continuity it could afford. For the workers who received redundancy notices, the loss could extend beyond wages. Royal household accommodation was governed by categories that Parliament examined in the 2000-201 session. The Public Accounts Committee distinguished between grace and favor accommodation, provided by the sovereign on an ex gratia basis, job-related accommodation, provided to serving employees, and pensioner accommodation, provided to qualifying former employees. The committee also recorded that, for employees who paid no rent, the provision of residential accommodation was taken into account when salaries were set. That sentence changes the meaning of a palace job. Housing could form part of compensation. A worker might accept a salary partly on the understanding that accommodation came with the role. If the role disappeared, the financial calculation changed immediately, even if a person technically received a redundancy payment. The parliamentary figures concern the wider royal household, not Clarence House alone. The figures don't show how many Queen Mother employees lived in tied accommodation. The safe conclusion is conditional. For workers whose accommodation was job-related, redundancy could affect both employment and housing. William Tallon provides the clearest documented example. After the Queen Mother's death, he left the lodge house attached to Clarence House. Accounts state that he received a letter instructing him to vacate the accommodation. He later moved to a ground-floor flat with a garden in Kennington, southeast London. The letter didn't make him homeless. It did remove a home connected to decades of service. That distinction is more revealing than the exaggerated version. The record does not show that all the affected workers lost their homes or that all became homeless. It shows that at least one long-serving senior employee occupied accommodation tied to his role and was required to leave when the household ended. The address was part of the job. When the job ended, the address did too. Pensions created another layer of inequality. Royal household employment involved formal benefits, including occupational pension arrangements, but the evidence does not establish identical eligibility for every person working at Clarence House in 2002. Employment categories mattered. So did length of service, age, pension scheme membership, and whether a worker was permanent, temporary, or casual. The available records don't provide an employee-by-employee breakdown of those distinctions. Tallon's own case again shows why broad statements are unsafe. A later report said that after approximately 51 years of service, he received an annual pension of about £11,000. That figure is retrospective rather than a 2002 pension statement, but it confirms that at least one exceptionally long-serving employee received institutional protection after leaving. It can't tell us what a junior worker received. It can't establish that every member of the household belonged to the same pension scheme. It can't prove that redundancy produced the same financial outcome for a chef, a page, a maid, a gardener, or a temporary worker. The claim that not all affected staff received pensions appears in later secondary reporting, but the accessible contemporary and official material does not provide a reliable workforce-wide breakdown. The stronger statement is that pension protection varied by employment category and service history. That variation is central. Two workers could receive the same redundancy notice and leave with very different levels of security. One might have a long service pension. Another might have no comparable scheme membership. One might have job-related housing. Another might rent privately. One might transfer into the Prince of Wales's establishment. Another might leave royal service entirely. A common notice didn't produce a common life afterward. The phrase, "one letter," needs the same care. No surviving source reproduces a single document addressed collectively to approximately 30 people. No evidence confirms identical wording, a shared delivery method, or a single signatory. The available record is more consistent with individual redundancy communications and separate housing instructions, including the letter sent to Tallon about Gate Lodge. The envelope remains a useful object because it represents the standardized form of the process. It shouldn't be treated as a literal group letter unless new evidence appears. That difference isn't a technical footnote. A single shared letter would suggest one dramatic act of collective dismissal. Individual notices point to something colder and more ordinary. A system processing each employee separately under the same institutional decision. The Queen Mother herself couldn't have ordered those notices. She died before the employment process unfolded. Reports describe officials trying to place some staff elsewhere, but the evidence does not identify her as the author or designer of the redundancies. During her lifetime, she was reported to have defended the jobs of pages when officials wanted to reduce their number. One account describes her defending the pages' jobs while making clear that an official's own position was less secure. Another reported story says that when Tallon was injured and unable to accompany her to Scotland, she sent him a 3-page letter wishing him well and encouraging him to come north. Those accounts are about one relationship, not the entire workforce. They show how personal the household could feel to particular employees, especially those who served for decades. They don't create a contractual guarantee that survived the Queen Mother's death. Tallon's long service makes the contrast especially sharp. He entered royal work as a teenager, became the senior figure of the Backstairs, and served the Queen Mother for roughly half a century. He had lived at Clarence House, knew its private routines, and occupied a position that was both practical and intimate. After her death, the documented action was administrative, a letter requiring him to leave the lodge. The Queen Mother's household had trained its workers to behave as if continuity were the natural condition of the place. Staff turnover was reportedly low. Familiar faces stayed for years. Preferences were remembered, rather than written down. Confidentiality and service accumulated into personal knowledge. The royal household, however, wasn't a family in the legal or economic sense. It was an employer with establishments, salaries, accommodation rules, pensions, and positions attached to individual royal principals. When one principal disappeared, the institution didn't preserve every job in the name of loyalty. It reorganized its staffing around the next household. That is why the transition at Clarence House matters beyond royal biography. It reveals how a workplace can be intimate without being secure. Workers may be trusted with private rooms, family routines, and sensitive information, yet still be processed through formal employment decisions when the institution's needs change. The Queen Mother's household was personal in its daily relationships and bureaucratic in its final consequences. Clarence House itself made that visible. The house wasn't abandoned after 2002. It was rewired, redecorated, refurnished, and prepared for the Prince of Wales, who moved in during 2003. The building continued to support royal work. Its function survived by changing hands. The same wasn't true for every worker. Some roles remained useful in the new establishment. Some people were reportedly retained, primarily within the Prince of Wales's household. Others received redundancy notices. The precise total is uncertain, but the pattern isn't. A large group faced the end of its employment, while a much smaller group found a route onward. The numbers commonly repeated, approximately 30 notices, more than 40 employees, and roughly 12 continued royal jobs, should be spoken as estimates from a later account. The Independent's contemporaneous report supports the broader description of dozens facing redundancy, and some long-serving staff being considered for retention. That is enough to establish the central fact without pretending to possess a complete register. The household ended as a functioning personal establishment. Its workers entered different futures. The surviving evidence does not tell us every name, every notice date, or every pension outcome. It does tell us that personal loyalty didn't create equal employment security. For William Tallon, the final separation involved both work and home. He lost the household and was told to leave Gate Lodge. He later had a pension and a new flat in Kennington, but the arrangement that had defined his adult life was finished. For the wider staff, the consequences can't be reconstructed person by person. The absence of a full list is itself part of the story. The palace could maintain detailed routines, while the public record preserved only rounded numbers and scattered individual cases. A tray had to arrive at a precise time. The staffing total could remain approximate. That was the contradiction inside Clarence House. Loyalty was recognized through medals, long service, and personal trust, but employment was governed by the survival of a royal establishment. When the Queen Mother died at Royal Lodge on 30 March 2002, the affection surrounding her didn't disappear. The workplace built around her did. The envelope represented that boundary. It didn't prove that loyalty meant nothing. It showed that loyalty had a limit imposed by the institution itself. A worker could spend decades entering through the backstairs, maintaining silence, setting the table, and carrying out the private routines of a royal life. When the household ended, the institution could acknowledge that service and still issue the notice.